Hey and welcome, I'm Hammeh, and good news, the Hero of Numbani, Overwatch's first novel, is finally here. In this video I'm going to talk about some of the Overwatch lore and new learnings we get from Nicky Drayden's first venture into the Overwatch universe. Timecodes are in the description below if you want to skip to different topics. And just before we start, there are of course spoilers for the book here, but I'm not going to spoil major plot points or indeed every single little detail. Although there are loads of cool details and lore little facts and context pieces in this book, it's the telling of them and the way in which they're told that's the joy of them. So if you like Overwatch lore and story, buy it, you won't regret it. There are links below if you want to go and see where you can get it from, and do if you comment about it and you've read it already in the comments below, try and keep your comments as spoiler free as you can. Thanks, let's get stuck in. So to start with, just a bit about where this sits in the Overwatch timeline and a brief synopsis of the story. From the excerpt that's already been shared, which is the first chapter in the book, we learn about Aoife, about her day-to-day life, about her friends, Hasana and Nade, her school, and her general world as she looks to work on her little juvie bots. We then learn more about her school life and how she feels though she's missing out on certain things before the Adarwe Genius Grant application comes up and Aoife decides to apply for it. Now, unsurprisingly, as we know, she wins it, and then we learn a lot more about what she's going to do with it. There's also, of course, the attack by Doomfist on the Numbani airport, which has already been described in the synopsis of the book, for example, and then the events unfolding after that, what Aoife does, how Orisa comes to be acquired and also made, the trials and tribulations of Aoife and Orisa as they go through a learning process together, and Aoife and her friends, as well as the backdrop of various other goings on as Doomfist and Talon step up their campaign to disrupt and undermine the stability in Numbani. And of course, all of this leads up to a big set piece, stellar conclusion at the end, with a very, very cool little prologue or aftermath as well. Timeline-wise, this is specifically referred to be taking place not long after the events of Mondata and the assassination of the Omnics leader in the events of the Alive short. Aoife gives that context. There's also a conversation between Lucio and Aoife where he mentions he's been hanging with a new crowd and they help him get something that he provides Aoife with. This may well talk about him potentially already having dealings with the newly reformed or underground Overwatch organisation under Winston. So it's really cool to know that this is firmly rooted in the last couple of years of modern Overwatch history of the universe since the events of the museum in Overwatch's unveiling cinematic of BlizzCon many years ago. First thing we learn is a whole bunch about Aoife as a person, as a young lady who is going to, or in the process of becoming, an adult and a hero. And indeed, there's a strong flavour of coming-of-age story about the Hero of Numbani. In the earlier parts of the book, we meet Aoife as she's struggling to reconcile her place between two very different worlds. Her age group, primary school world of her peers, and the senior high international baccalaureate world of her calculus and physics studies that she's in due to her immense aptitude in the sciences. And indeed, as we meet Aoife, her friends Nade and Hasana, her peers in school, her cousin, and indeed the world around her, there is a big contrast, and a lot of the story is to do with her finding her place in between these various worlds and people. Aoife, on the one hand, is an entrepreneur. She is on Hologram, the Overwatch World version of Patreon, where creators get support from and update their followers and supporters. Her juvie robot idea is so popular that she can't keep up with demand. On the other hand, she's feeling stuck between not being fully in touch with the hijinks and day-to-day goings-on of her friends at primary school, but not feeling like she belongs or is one of the senior high students either. And throughout the book, we have this contrast between the growing seriousness of Aoife's situation as she tries to get Orisa finished and ready as Doomfist's pressure on the city grows, against her more youthful side. We're shown that she's a fan of Overwatch in so many different ways, owning Overwatch pyjamas, for example, that she doesn't think is suitable attire for her video application for the Adarwe Genius Grant. Her Overwatch coin bank with Reinhardt's rocket hammer that she has to smash into to get some money for atoning for some of Orisa's, shall we say, accidents. A couple of times her love of Overwatch cartoons in universe is also mentioned. She compares one such situation she's in to a cartoon where Sojourn and a bunch of Overwatch agents, knowing that they're outnumbered, bravely go and fight anyway. So as well as knowing that in-universe Overwatch was as heavily promoted and merchandised and as part of a culture as it has been indeed in our world, Ify continuously is trying to find a balance even before Doomfist attacks Numbani's airport of her place in life. And in many ways, when Orisa comes along and when Ify decides to build Orisa and try and teach Orisa, it brings the two together. Her being able to find a balance between spending time with her friends and being the age and place in life that she is, with aspiring to more and with growing up and learning and growing as a person. And it's these examples of Ify's character that ground the book and make it such a nice story for me. She, at one point, spins a little bit of a tall tale in order to try and seem cool and fit in with the kids at her senior high school, but she doesn't like being called a kid, even when she's being interviewed by some police at the tender age of 11. However, she shows her youth and naivety in other ways as well. Without giving away details, the dynamic trio are clearly, shall we say, not masters of purchasing or fulfillment at one point in the book. And it's these little examples that I really like that balance out Ify's character and show the journey that she's going on throughout the book. We are also introduced to other members of Ify's family, her mother Fola, her dad Balaji, and her cousin Dio. And also there is mention of her other cousin Bisi, who fell in with a rather bad lot, got involved in an incident that meant his brother Dio was beaten up instead of him and then promptly disappeared after that. We learn more about what he's been up to later in the novel. The story is as much one of Nade and Hasana as it is Ify and Orisa themselves, and the three friends' friendship, the ways in which it's tested and evolves, is a big part of the story too. Next up, of course, there's a whole bunch of lore and background and context about Orisa herself. We learn firstly that she is actually the very OR-15 that was slammed into and imprinted into the wall in Numbani. This is specifically called out in the book, and Ify recognises her chassis as such and decides that that is the one that she wants, symbolically as the OR-15 that will be the one that is rejuvenated to beat Doomfist. We also learn that Orisa's construction, although Ify certainly provides the money, certainly has Orisa in her home and is also responsible for the robotics and engineering side of things, the rest of Orisa is also very much a team effort. Nade and Hasana chime in with their own individual skills and interests that they have. And indeed, so much is their contribution that for one reason and another, when they are unable to help for a small period of time in the book, we actually see Ify's progress slow down quite a degree. They do say that a month or so has gone by with Ify struggling to work on Orisa on her own. Hasana provides a certain creative flair. Nade, well, attempts to source some parts to various levels of efficiency and also gets involved in some of the physical work in terms of getting Orisa's chassis ready for use. We also learn that when she is first switched on in the Origin trailer, Orisa is not fully functionally or indeed part-wise complete. And during the book, we get to learn a bunch about her various different parts and how they work in universe as well. Without going into all the details, we learn more about the Branford arm, mentioned on one of the Orisa teasers. It's actually from an OR-14 original form Edina unit made out of the Omniums in Africa. We also hear about her Luxor hardlight caster that she has. It allows lassos and energy traps to be cast. Now, she doesn't initially have a Tobalstein reactor or a miniaturized Tobalstein reactor. This would power the graviton charge that would actually let Orisa halt enemies, so we learn a bit more about her in-game ability there. And she also has no fusion driver, at least to start with anyway. Throughout the book, and not just with Orisa, there's lovely tying in of Numbani and the world of Overwatch and Ify and her family and the Yoruba to the Nigerian and African world and cultural history. One such example is talking about Orisa's supercharger, the Gangan drum, from Orisa's and indeed from Ify's West African roots. We also learn a bit about Orisa's voice and what Ify mixes together to make it. It's part her mother, part her grandmother, part her calculus teacher, and even part Gabrielle Adarwe, the founder or one of the founders of Numbani, and also in the United Nations, one of the key instigators in the creation of the original Overwatch strike team and the Overwatch organisation to follow. We also learn a lot of detail as to how Orisa is constructed and put together, various things with her programming, various things to do with the modules that she has within her, including things like empathy and the absence of certain modules, indeed like the sarcasm module that we know from Orisa's voice lines. Her personality, her growth, of an intelligence, her growth of her emotional intelligence, without going into too many specifics, are a really joyous part of the writing a novel that I really, really enjoyed. She has a really funny fail-safe or backdoor built into her. It's very useful at one point early in Orisa's life when she's switched on, and there are some, shall we say, challenges with the original programming that Ify has put together. So Ify can effectively disable or interrupt Orisa with one particular thing that she does, and it pops up again later in the novel. It's absolutely hilarious. Can't wait for you guys to check it out. We also learn a lot about the background to, and indeed Orisa's personality in general. She's very literal when she's just been turned on, and in her first couple of hours of existence she certainly needs to learn to be empathetic and understand context around commands and directives. And she learns all kinds of things throughout the book, from being better at threat detection to indeed shop merchandising and basic branding, and also indeed, to a degree but not perfectly, platitudes and sarcasm. The relationship and mentorship that Ify has to show and help Orisa with is really, really cool. They have so many awesome conversations, and during Orisa's sort of learning stage there are a lot of references to the Overwatch world and lore and things we've seen about Orisa's story so far, particularly the origin story and trailer. So it's awesome throughout this book, may I just say as a general point, to see how grounded it is in the Overwatch world, but not too restrained by it either, which I can only imagine is certainly a challenge if you were to write in an established universe. How much can you iterate and invent and create and contextualize within it against how much you're perhaps restrained by sort of certain things that people, fans, community, existing publications have already created and laid out or expect. Now, Orisa does a lot of things throughout the book that Ify doesn't expect. Quite often, to start with, they're somewhat problematic. Some of them are indeed very sweet as well. Another thing we learn a whole bunch about is Omnics and their role in the city of Numbani, and perhaps a little bit as to their role in the wider world of Overwatch 2. Now, firstly, we learn a bit about Omnicode, the language of the Omnics. Ify mentions at one point that the fact that one of her classmates saying they could understand any of it was absolute rubbish, considering that as a non-augmented human she'd tried studying for 3 years and could only decipher the odd word. And throughout the book, Omnics are very much woven in as being part of society, part of the community in Numbani, but also concerns and worries and indeed prejudices, both historic and current, are also shown as to how people feel about Omnics. We actually see Omnics in the book in a whole variety of social positions, in a whole variety of jobs, very much on an even, or apparently even, playing field with humans. We see an Omnic as a teacher, as the principal of Ify's primary school. We are also introduced to several Omnics in the fields of the arts and creative fields, such as Sasha Rhimes, a performance artist, Tonal Abyss, one of Ify's favourite groups or musical acts apart from Lucio, a huge multi-member Omnic group that have their own squabblings and infighting as to what time signature they use to play and coordinate all of their music in. Agba Aja, one of Hasana's favourite artists, one of the most accomplished apparently Nigerian artists, and also an Omnic artist, and other cultural figures are mentioned and name-checked as well. We hear from Nade about Flash Brighton and the Omnic Crusaders being one of his favourite film series that he watches, and there's even a nod to Halfred Glitchbot at one point too, who, if you've been watching my channel for the last bunch of years, or you know your Overwatch lore, you'll know them as the Omnic film director who you're escorting as the payload in the car on the Hollywood level. And not for nothing is Numbani the city of harmony. We see and hear from Omnics in everyday life as Ify and then Orisa go about their daily routine and business. And it's also very interesting to see that I don't think there are really very many examples at all of unawakened Omnics, for want of a better term. All of the Omnics, or most of the Omnics we run into, have personalities and are going about their day-to-day business too. It's interesting that as Doomfist and Talon's pressure on Numbani continues, we see direct intervention between the human Omnic coexistence and bond, as it were. We do see at several points that Omnics, in spite of their awakened natures, can be altered and can be disrupted. Some Omnic shopkeepers and storeholders in one such incident in the book were made to be perfectly fine and conversive and normal with Omnics, but would ignore humans completely in a move that Talon did deliberately to stir tensions between the two groups. It does appear that Omnics as well as Omnicodes do have a sort of certain body language of their own. At one point we're introduced to one auctioneer Omnic making a tilt of the head, which Aoife said was the Omnic gesture to indicate amusement. So whether that's a programmed behaviour or something that all Omnics of a certain kind share, we don't know. But it does suggest that Omnics have certain body language cues that humans recognise as being Omnic gestures for certain perhaps emotions or things like that. And whether they be auctioneers or teachers or even in some case babysitters, Hasana actually mentions at one point one particular Omnic that went haywire called Ndidi and said that she babysat Hasana when she was a kid. So throughout the novel we're given a lot of examples like this of exactly how normal Omnics are as a part of society and as members of society in a shared society of Numbani. And indeed the Omnics are watching Aoife's work as well. Without giving away too much of a spoiler, an Omnic in particular is very, very key in helping Aoife secure Orisa in the first place. However, it's interesting to see that although Aoife and younger generations are certainly very, very used to the way that things are, some of the older generation of humans in Numbani actually remember or inadvertently use language and indeed prejudices from a previous time against Omnics. There's one such example where someone in praise of Orisa's growing ability says, oh, she could get a job at the island port working like that. And then Aoife sort of says, well, that was a little bit of a bad term, the Tin Can Island Port, as it was known by people. And remember, of course, Torbjorn's term of tin cans, a dime a dozen, certainly a derogatory term towards Omnics. Aoife also mentions that it was the scene of an Omnic dock worker revolt many years ago. So some of the older generations still, even though there's a new reality, perhaps a little bit embedded in the past. And of course, next up, we couldn't have the Hero of Numbani and Aoife and Orisa's story without learning loads about Doomfist. Now, Akande Ogundimu, or indeed the Scourge, the third of the Doomfists, if we are to know the history of Doomfist from the Numbani Heritage Museum, is of course a key part of this story. Now, to talk too much about what Doomfist does during the story is to really, really spoil the book. So I'm going to touch on a few details here, whilst giving you an idea of what we learn about him too. We even firstly get a bit of history of the Doomfists. Aoife remembers a super fun family time game that her parents used to play with her, where they'd hide in the bathroom of their home when warning sirens were going off, when the Scourge of Numbani, Akinjide Adeyemi, was attacking. Now, the story's internal timeline, as it were, is set over a series of months, but these series of months, it seems, encompass Doomfist still being in prison at the beginning of the story, Doomfist then breaking out, and then an increasing campaign as he attacks Numbani Airport for the Gauntlet, and then with Talon goes on a campaign of intimidation and terror around Numbani. We actually learn what happened at his trial and the fairly brutal public process, or so Aoife says, that the world had watched as court-appointed cybernetic surgeons pulled the tech off his skin and pulled his upgrades off before suturing him up and sending him away. To have someone medically operated on after they'd been sentenced and removed of their cybernetic enhancements, if this is a normal thing in the Overwatch world, seems to be a very, very brutal public exhibition of justice indeed, but an interesting detail there. When Doomfist attacks Numbani Airport, and this fight, without spoiling it, is covered in great detail, the cybernetics are brought to the fore. Aoife immediately sees gold-plated cybernetic devices implanted into his fists and spine, linking to the communications piece covering his ears. The whole section on the airport attack is really, really awesome, and it really links in and does justice to not only sort of Numbani and the way that it looks in game, but also the way that the airport looks in particular. You can really feel the story when you go back and look through the level. So I'm sure you'll enjoy that when you give it a read. Of course, Doomfist makes several appearances in person, talking to Aoife in certain situations, and also we view Doomfist giving various speeches and committing various crimes via the perspective of the news. We get a very in-depth speech from him at one point as to his motivations for his actions, and therefore a reflection on his philosophy that he's bringing to Talon. Now, without sort of covering the entire speech because it's really, really awesome, it's quite interesting that he says things, for example, like, kindness to Omnics is nothing to be ashamed of. He has the same kindness in his own heart. But he then goes on to say afterwards, but this kindness has made people weak and reliant upon Omnics rather than keeping themselves strong. And he talks about power and the balance of power and the balance of power between humans and Omnics, and how humanity after the first Omnic crisis should not become or be hyper-reliant or integrated with Omnics. This view of humanity as being complacent and weak, Doomfist says it's hard to act when everything seems so balanced and just currently, but Doomfist talks a lot about history in a lot of the interactions and discussions he has, both in-game and his dialogue in this book. The theme of wanting to avoid seeing history repeating itself, and that if you study your history you know what's coming, shows Doomfist's perspective. He very much believes that when another Omnic crisis of some kind or another comes around, then humanity will be not prepared, too reliant on Omnics, not strong enough to be able to do what they need to do. So as a starting point, as a development of Doomfist's philosophy that we've seen in his bio and in-game, I like the speech, I like the way it's covered in the book. I think it starts moving that forward, and then maybe when we see more of Talon in future, a few more pieces of the puzzle will be completed. But it's certainly a really good insight into Doomfist's personal mindset and mentality, and how it could shape what Talon is up to. Now, as a lore fact, a final interesting thing that Doomfist says as part of his speech is that he thinks that humanity aren't aware of the wolves lurking in the adjacent woods, waiting for their opportunity to feast. You may think that I am that wolf, Doomfist paused, but I am not. It's interesting that Doomfist feels that really he and perhaps Talon are not the biggest threat. So there is a sense as well in the way that Doomfist talks that he knows of or suspects greater threats to come that aren't just theoretical, and really his role is preparing humanity. He is not the conqueror almost, he is not the powerful, the dominator. He is preparing humanity and toughening it up for whatever these bigger threats are to come. So what could these be, whether they be perceived threats or actual threats? That's a really interesting thing that's been raised in this novel. We also find out in one particular conversation that Doomfist is very familiar with Aoife. He reads her hologram social media profile, and he's very, very familiar with her work. So there you go, Doomfist with his engineering history, seeing a fellow engineer in spirit, if not in ideological or ethical outlook on life. Another cool thing we learn and see more of in the Hero of Numbani is other characters from the Overwatch universe and a bit more about them. First things first, I'll cover Talon. There's a particular Talon operative that we see signs of, even though they are not mentioned by name. They certainly pop up, and they're referred to in a couple of incidents as Talon and Doomfist look to stir the pot of human-Omnic relations in Numbani. So there are a couple of fun references and mentions of that, so hopefully you'll look forward to reading those. The big character in this book, and he is fairly chunky, is Lucio. In addition, now we get to know a lot about Lucio. We hear a lot from him directly without spoiling the middle and the end of the story. He gets involved in a fairly big way in what's going on. And from the very beginning of the book, from the free excerpt, in fact the first chapter that you can read on the Play Overwatch website on the Overwatch blog, we get a whole set of details from Aoife, from Hasana, from Nade as to their fan worship effectively of Lucio and their knowledge about everything to do with him. Now, I won't go through all of those here because you can check it out in my previous video talking about the lore of the excerpt, or you can go read it for free on the Overwatch website. Lucio, when he comes into the story, and it's again one of the really awesome points of the story and some really cool stuff around him, you see a lot to do with his character. He talks a lot about his past and his background. He does talk about his fighting with Vishkar, about his dad and his sonic technology. He actually gets very involved in helping Aoife with Orisa a little bit as well, for example. And there is some discussion of how his tech works, and we actually see it in action as well, without giving anything more away. Now, I must emphasise that really we see a lot of Lucio's character more than hard lore canon facts, although there are plenty of those in this book. But what you get, as with many other characters, is a real building out of and sort of an introduction to his character and seeing him outside of game in a normal situation, which is really, really awesome. I really, really like Lucio and his role in this book. It makes perfect sense that he's there. And personally, I really appreciate the attempts that have been made to explain a little bit in book how the technology that we see in the world of Overwatch the game works in the real life of Overwatch the world, for example. Last but by no means least, there are so many cool little details of the world of Numbani and of the future that you can imagine in the world of Overwatch that are just sewn throughout. The world building and the fabric of the setting of Numbani in which the story is based is really, really awesome. I'll mention a few little ones here. For example, we've already had Hologram, the social media Patreon style platform. Efi has a whole set of characters and of relatives and more. In between each chapter, you get pictures of Efi's hologram posts, sort of talking about what's happened in the chapter and various people chiming up in the comments. You should definitely, if you read the book, have a look at those because there's a funny little narrative going on in all of those comments, even in between chapters, and they're like little pictures, which is really, really fun. The whole worldly reality kind of sort of set in. Even though there's been a disaster in Numbani when Doomfist attacks the airport, in the ensuing events, you see Efi being very aware of just some of the realities of the world. For example, why people are swarming, for example, to try and maybe not cover up what's happened, but maybe sort of mask how ineffective we know that the OR-15s were in trying to repel Doomfist. And a whole bunch of real life topics and issues are covered in here very, very adroitly and in a very, very Overwatchy style way, of prejudice in society, of inflammatory rhetoric, of profiteering and warmongering and all kinds of things in between. So whoever reads this, I think it will speak to a bunch of different people on a bunch of different levels, and I really, really enjoyed the detail of the Overwatch world being reflected in real life and vice versa. And the world building detail of things added to the Overwatch universe is awesome. Everything from cybernetically enhanced dogs through to the Overwatch world's own version of Bitcoin that has synthetic blood in it with a DNA style code linked to people that couldn't be duplicated. The all-in-all futuristic vision of life in Numbani, of self-driving cars, of a drone network of delivery drones that can be summoned at the touch of a button and take anything anywhere in the city. It would certainly make my online auctions and clearing out my boxes of stuff a lot easier were that to exist today. Even discussions of conventions of Omnicon, a convention in the Overwatch universe, and of someone being a little bit frustrated with a Halfred Glitchbot cosplay winning and complaining that the entire outfit was store-bought. So I'm no expert on cosplay, but that smacked me of conversations and things I've seen on social media and in real life, whether you feel that that's gatekeeping of cosplay or not. But the reflections of a whole bunch of things, of interesting little details brought to the Overwatch world throughout the book, really made it feel at home for me. And last but by no means least, the book has an awesome little epilogue in which we see a little bit as to what the future holds for Efi and Orisa. So it's very, very cool. I won't give it all away, but if you don't want to be spoiled, then certainly skip forward about a minute or so. Basically what happens is that Orisa gate crashes one of Efi's lessons, and effectively the two of them have to go somewhere with someone. And although that someone isn't mentioned, it's just a really cool ending and an idea as to what the two might be up to next and how their hero education and operations will continue. So it's a really, really sort of cliffhangery style ending, but also sort of hinting to things. Really, really loved it. So really, really cool stuff there. And I really enjoyed this book. Now, obviously, I love Overwatch lore, I love the Overwatch universe, so I probably would. But I read a reasonable bunch as well, not so much recently as I have done in the past, and I'm trying to start doing again. But I really, really enjoyed this. I think if you're a fan of Overwatch lore and the Overwatch universe, for me it was about £4 or £5 on Google Play. Of course, other online stores are available. You can get it in paperback, you can download it in an EPUB format from various places. Have a look in the description below. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed this video explaining the kind of lore that we've learnt, even in light detail and trying to be spoiler free I've talked here for about half an hour. So thank you, and do say potato in the comments if you've managed to get this far, because I appreciate it so much, and you enjoying this video and sticking through. If you've liked this video, throw a like, subscribe, comment below if you've read the book with what you think of it, and if you've listened to the video, then comment below with whether you think you'll enjoy it, any questions you may have, any thoughts you may have. I'd love to hear your thoughts too. Do check out all of my other Overwatch content in the playlists here, as well as lore, storytelling, world building, and other things. And I will be doing a shorter review of this book as well, which is spoiler free. I might do a full spoiler one as well, depending on giving a bit of time and letting people buy and read the book first. Big thanks to my patrons on Patreon, without whom videos like this just simply wouldn't be possible. I'm revamping my Patreon at the moment to go with some new content and some new things I'd like to do in the channel. If you'd like to see how you could support me, please stop by patreon.com/Hammeh from $1, £1, a coin to your Witcher or Euro or currency of your choice a month. It really, really helps me out. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.